Hi, I'm John Orth. I'm a teacher at Great Circle. I'm here to talk about the IEPs and the process and how we can help you better understand them. An IEP stands for Individualized Education Program. It is a document developed for each public school child who needs special education. IEP is created through a team effort and reviewed annually. The IEP, if your daughter or son has an IEP, you can call an IEP whenever you want. It doesn't have to be yearly. You can have 2, 3, 4 a year. The key and the part that I really want to emphasize today is it's a team effort, meaning the teacher and the district and the representatives and the parents work together as a team. In my experience, the IEPs that are most effective and beneficial are those where everybody is involved. Sadly, many times I don't have parent involvement in IEP. So we'll have an annual IEP and we won't have parents show up. And that's never a good thing. I always want input from my parents. There are little things that the parents are the experts on the kids, and I'm the one working with their kid, but the parent knows way more about a child than I do. So it's important that there is parental involvement. The IEP puts the stress on individualize. An IEP is written specifically for your child's needs. Individualize is very important. So no IEP is ever the same. No IEP present level has ever been written that's the same. There's never been an IEP where all the goals are the same. It should be very unique to the individual and their needs. There could be characteristics from one kid to another that are similar, but how you go about meeting those needs are going to be different based on the child. The IEP is considered a working document and can be altered at any time with the approval by the members of your child's IEP team. And it is a legal document as well. So if there are services that are supposed to be provided in that document, they need to be provided. If the child is supposed to get occupational therapy 60 minutes a week and they're not getting it, then that's a problem. If they're supposed to be getting speech and language and they're not getting it, that's a problem. So it's a legal document. And again, it is the best IEPs are those where everyone is involved and you have a lot of input from both sides. Okay? All right. What is an IEP meeting? It is a team approach that is usually attended by regular ed teacher, special ed teacher, school rep, and parent. And many IEPs will have more people there than that. If you want to bring someone for support, that's more than acceptable. Most of the IEPs I attend, there's an occupational therapist there and a speech and language therapist there. Friends can be there. The IEPs, I've had educational advocates there for the person, which is good because that's like a support. Many parents seem overwhelmed at an IEP. Like, what does all this mean? And there's so much information that goes into it, I can see how it could be overwhelming for people to grasp what it is you're trying to do with the child. I've had IEP meetings before where there have been lawyers present because the people feel they're not getting what they need. And so you can have many, many people at an IEP. Usually there's more than that number. Again, the key is the parent. You need to have the parent at the IEP. Yes?
This is a question that could be answered later if need be, but how do you go about finding an educational advocate?
If you can probably... Repeat the question. She was asking, how do you go about finding an educational advocate? I don't know the answer to that right off, but if you, whatever district you're in, if you inquire about that, I'm sure they can help you with that. I don't know offhand how you go about getting that. Yes, sir?
Student typically not present at the IEP?
It depends on their age. When they get to be older, like teenagers, a lot of times they will come in after the IEP is over, and they will come in and the members will talk about what they talked about. But as the IEP is going on, no, they're typically not in there for the whole IEP.
Can you repeat that question?
The gentleman was asking, are the students typically at an IEP? And the answer is not typically. Older students do come in many times at the end. And I've had kids come in just so they can meet everybody, but they don't really participate as far as like the actual planning of goals and behavior intervention plans and those types of things. Yes, ma'am.
Who or how are those meetings and the program funded? Who pays?
Her question was, how are the programs in the meetings funded? The school districts are responsible. So if you have a student from, for example, where I work, I have 6 different school districts that I'm working with presently in my classroom. So I have a kid from Fort Zumwalt that's in my classroom. The school district is paying for that student to be in my classroom. The school districts are ultimately responsible for the education of the child. Okay? All right. As I talked about earlier, the IEP is required to be reviewed every 365 days. You can have them more often than that. Many times we have IEPs when a kid moves from one district to another. So if a family moves, typically a change of placement IEP is called. And what will happen is the district will just come in and meet, and you usually do not rewrite the whole IEP. You just meet and everybody meets each other and you agree with continuing with the goals that you had. But because some districts, and I'll get into that a little bit later on, the districts all have different IEP forms. So if a kid moves from, let's say, I'll use Fort Zumwalt again, say they move into the city, the Fort Zumwalt IEP is different from the city IEP. The components are the same, but it's different, and how they go about completing the IEP is different. So it just makes things a little bit more complicated. And the school requires to send a 10-day notification of the meeting date. And typically, you send them out, you want to send them out before that, well before that. Where we work, we send them out at least 30 days before we want to have the scheduled IEP, because that gives a lot of leeway and flexibility in when you can actually have the meeting set up. Because to get everybody to agree on a date is challenging. Yes?
Do you know if, like the occupational therapist and speech therapist, the people working with your child, do they have to be present for the next IEP for the following year?
Yes, if they are part of the IEP, if they wrote and have something in the present level of the IEP, and if they have goals, they should be present. Now, sometimes it happens where they can't make it because there's a conflict of meetings. But what I'll use myself as an example. What will happen if I have a kid that has occupational therapy and the occupational therapist can't make it, she will send along her update on the present level and her goals to me, and I will forward them to the process coordinator, and we will put all those in there. Yeah, we like them to be there, but sometimes it's just not feasible, because we have occupational therapists where I work that have 48, 50 kids on their caseload. And you know, sometimes you just can't make it, but they're encouraged to be there, and if they can be there, they are. Okay? Basics of the IEP, goals of the IEP meeting to determine where and how your child will receive the support he or she needs to be successful in the school environment. To determine the services your child will need, including therapy, specialized equipment, and other considerations. What the first part, determining where and how your child will receive the support he needs to be successful, that's when people come together and give their present level about what a child is currently doing. When we get further on, we have a sample of an IEP that I wrote. We can go through that a little bit more, but that's basically people coming together and talking about the child and what services they think they need. As far as the therapy, specialized equipment and consideration, OT and speech, they are tested for that. They are evaluated for that. And where I work, the districts where they come from will do the testing. So you'll have an occupational therapist come from special school district and test to see if they qualify for occupational therapy. Those people that would then be present at the IEP and say he or she is eligible and this is what we recommend. Yes?
Now, if a parent feels that their child is eligible for therapy and they are considered not eligible by the therapist or the school district, how can they, I guess, appeal that, or how can they go about to try to find a good solution so all of the needs are met, based on the parent's perspective as well as the school's perspective?
Did you get that question? Yeah.
It would help me if you could repeat it, but if it's okay.
Okay. Emily was asking about if a child is determined not to qualify for a service and the parent thinks that they do need the service, how do you go about coming to some type of agreement on that? And the answer is you can ask for a retesting from a different source. And then come back together and see if you have different results. That happens quite often because sometimes in occupational therapy, for sure, I know I'm not an occupational therapist, but I know sometimes that's a little bit subjective about whether or not a student can do a certain thing. But what happens with us sometimes is when we have a situation like that, typically the occupational therapist will say, the test showed that he didn't qualify, but we can still provide the service based on the disability. This would be beneficial towards helping him because they have ADHD. You can rephrase it and have it written in a way to help that kid get the service that they need, because that's the ultimate goal. So just if they don't pass a certain test, that doesn't mean they don't necessarily qualify, but you do need then to pass that test for the districts to reimburse you to have that service provided. So get a second opinion. You can ask for a retesting. Yes?
This just happened to me. My daughter didn't qualify for speech, but she qualified for OT and PT. But they said it takes 6 months to get a retest.
Mm-hmm.
And then I argued social and emotional, and so now they're doing it within 8 weeks. So.
Yes, yeah, that's, you do need to advocate for yourself. My experience is that most districts, and certainly where I work, we do want to do what's best for the student, but then you have to work within the parameters and guidelines that you have in order to get reimbursed to meet those needs. But that's a perfect example right there. You advocated, and instead of 6 months, it was 2 months.
Well, my daughter can say all the words, but she can't talk to her peers who can't communicate. So even though she knows the words, she can't talk. So she can't, express herself.
Yeah.
So it goes further than that.
Advocate. Yeah, that's the key. You have to speak up, and no question, like I said, is a dumb question. Yes.
Okay, we have a Facebook Live comment
Yes.
from Jessica. Jessica wants to know, what is special school district's role at an IEP?
Special school district role at an IEP. Where I work, we are a separate purchase of service facility, so we get kids from special school district. I can't speak for special school district because I don't work for them. but I currently have 2 kids from special school district in my room. They will come to the meeting, and I will provide a present level and offer goals, and they will ask for how do you come up with that, and their role is to kind of see how their kid is doing in our services. So, and then they come, like the representative will come and make sure that's still appropriate placement for a special school district kid. But I'm not sure if that answered her question.
I think you got it.
You got it?
I think she'll
Okay.
let us know.
Okay. Any other?
Give us a heart.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, I'm going to move on. What makes up a good goal for an IEP? Goals are what all the kids have on their IEP, whether or not they're diagnosed with a learning disability, emotional disturbance, other health impaired, or all list of disabilities. And you come up with a goal, the teacher and the team come up with a goal to meet that student's needs. So if your student has a learning disability in reading, then when you do your IEP, you better have a goal on reading, obviously. Believe it or not, I've had kids come to me before with IEPs and they're diagnosed with learning disabilities in math and or reading, or they're diagnosed with this, that, or the other, but there are no goals towards it. How that happens, I don't know, but it does happen. And when I come up with goals for my kids, and I always ask the parents and the people there, does that goal sound good to you? What can I add to that goal to make it better and still use in the classroom? And then I ask parents, would you like me to add a goal? Most parents are fine with what I have, but sometimes they will say, can you write a goal about such and such? And then we add it at the IEP. Be specific and focus on one skill at a time. The goal has to be measurable to monitor progress. Be realistic by keeping the child's abilities in mind. Be time limited and attainable within the school year. Sometimes you have too many goals. I had a student last year come to me, he had 19 goals, and he did not have OT and speech. It's too many goals. 19 goals is too many goals. So I couldn't wait for the day where we were doing his IEP over, because I slashed it from 19 to 6. Because 19, you're too much all over the place there. Go to the very basic problem, the areas where the kid is having a problem, and deal with those first, and the other things will fall in line. 19 is too many goals, in my opinion. Again, what to expect. Number of goals depends on the child. Determine which team member is responsible for helping your child meet those goals. If you have a child in special ed, if you have a child going to our school, I'm the one responsible for a child meeting those goals, basically. Anybody have questions about goals? Okay. What to expect when you're in the IEP meeting. Team discussions on the following: the child's present level of performance. The sample IEP we have, I'll go through that a little bit with you. Reports from the parents and teachers, and evaluations and performances on state formal and informal assessments. It's important that as much information is provided as possible in the present level. Any area that's reported on in the present level of performance has to have a goal with it. So if the present level is going on and on about Johnny unable to remain on task, there has to be a goal dealing with task. There has to be a goal in that. If the present level is talking about he's unable to stay regulated during the school day, there has to be a goal on how you're going to help that kid stay regulated during the school day. The second part, I was talking with Emily about this before our presentation. The report from the parent is very important. I'm getting their daughter or son, and I know very little about them except what has been written about them before I've ever worked with them. And the little things that a parent can tell you about the child can make a big difference in the school setting. And that's why it's important that parents are involved one way. The parent has to be involved for the student to be successful. Rarely does it happen if there's no parent involvement that a kid is going to be as successful as they could be.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Does that include a foster parent?
Yes. Yes. Foster parent. If you're a foster parent, they should have a part and say in the present level as well. Yes, ma'am.
With that in mind, what I understand is like the initial IEP has all the history and the background, but then when they get to the next one, all of that history is not shared. Why not? Like, if indeed that is such helpful information to have, why isn't it a section on the IEP for years?
All of the third bullet point on there, the evaluations, that stuff should all be carried from one IEP to the next. So,
No, she's not, I think that.
But the written background.
The written
history, like
background.
they're in foster care, or they're adopted, or they were.
yeah.
The reason, it's one thing to look at tests and evaluative things, but you're talking about background and then absent parents potentially. Like, why? What is it about the state that says that's like it's in the initial one, and the first school gets it, and now you go to a different school, and that school doesn't get that information?
Well, you know what we do at Great Circle, we have a section on, there's a section on the present level, it's called Change and Current Functioning, and that's where you would talk about that kind of stuff. So say Johnny last year was, I don't know, out of his seat 100% of the time. And the changes in current functioning, you can keep all that going because you can say with your data, Johnny is now out of his seat 50% of the time. But the change in current function, you can put that information in there. You know, he recently, I keep stuff. I don't know why other people would do that. I mean, you can't, if a kid has been in special ed services for 8 years, it is going to be hard to keep everything in it, but the important stuff you should keep in it. And I've had the longest, I'll have a kid for about 3 years. 3 years would be about the most I ever have a student. And I keep that updated, so they should keep information in that. But you should stress what currently is going on with reference back to this is what he used to do. So there's a section on the IEP called Change and Current Functioning where you can keep a lot of the old information in there. Does that answer your question? I hear a little bit of frustration. I understand what you're talking about. Yeah, the importance of, yeah, tests are great. Tests are great, they give you numbers, but I guess what you're asking me is that doesn't always tell you a lot about the child sometimes.
Well, and what you're talking about, I understand, like they have grown from 1 year to the next, but the part that doesn't change is they were born on this date, they were here for their first 5 years. My child was adopted, so that history doesn't ever change. And to have to tell somebody that over and over feels daunting. Like, I've already made sure it's written well. This is what I want them to know. That's imperative, important for them to understand. So my thing is, why don't they leave that in there so I don't have to go find the old one and make, it just seems like some of that information should follow. And I'm just wondering why, why they wouldn't, like by law, just keep in that basic history.
I'm not sure why they don't, because I'm telling you I do. Okay. So because that is a good reference point. I mean, and most kids, to get one way they get special ed services, they have the evaluations done, like a total evaluations, and those are done every 3 years. And so that'll give you a lot of information too. But yeah, I'm not sure why some people don't keep that in there. They should. Okay, we'll move on. What to expect in the IEP meeting. Prepare yourself for hearing about your child's strengths and weaknesses in the school environment. Discussion will identify recommendations on how to build up weaknesses and promote strengths. And the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires a student's IEP to include a description of progress towards his or her annual goals, methods used for measuring progress, and when parents can expect to receive progress reports outlining their students' goals and progress thus far. I'm a teacher, and I'm going to say this. Ask your teacher for how did you come up with 70% of the time? How did you come up with 90% of the time? And the teacher should be able to show you, here is data, here is what I have. Here are work samples. When I have an IEP meeting, I bring a binder, and in the binder I have work samples and point sheets and everything possible, and I let everybody look at that while the IEP meeting is going on. So that part is really important, and I would hold teachers and people accountable for that. If a teacher is telling you progress on a goal, Johnny will follow directions 70% of the time, and the teacher says, Johnny's only at 40% of the time, ask them, well, how do you know that? Put them on the spot. How do you know it? Because we are trained that you keep data, and you keep records on that, and I do. You should have a record of that, like I have running a daily data on all my kids. You don't take data, I'm sorry, rephrase it. I don't take data every day, but you should have a record of their goals that they have on the IEP. A teacher should have that recorded with progress on it 2, 3, 4 times a week. And they should bring that to the IEP meeting. Many times I bring it to a meeting and people won't ask to see it, which is fine, but the teacher should have that. And ask the teacher, how are you teaching 8+8? Because teachers are like me, like to talk about stuff like that. So ask, and the teacher can tell you, well, we use the Numbers World curriculum, or we use corrective reading, whatever it is. Ask. Before you go to the IEP meeting, bring someone with you as a support person. If you feel like you're going to be overwhelmed, and I can't imagine what it's like because I haven't been to an IEP meeting, we don't have kids of our own. I can only imagine what it's like for a parent to go into a meeting and they're by themselves, and you have a teacher, a therapist, a state, a district rep. You have 7, 8 people, and you're the only person here. You think you're going into a meeting, and all you're going to hear is bad stuff about your kid. I can't imagine what that feels like for a parent. So bring someone with you, just to have somebody with you, unless you think I'm okay by myself, but I would recommend bringing a friend with you, just as support. In the meetings, the people there aren't meaning to be intimidating or to say bad things about your kid, but I think that's the impression some parents get sometimes. Oh, we're going to a meeting and we're going to hear how bad Bobby's doing. Bring someone with you. You have that right to do that. You can bring whoever you want with you. Be aware of what services and accommodation your child receives at school and what you may want to add to their plan. Accommodations are things like preferential seating, shortened assignments, breaks, etc., etc. Ask the teacher, what are you doing to help meet my kid's needs? Write down questions you have for the IEP team in regard to your child's educational experience. Write down goals that you have for your child. I had talked about that. I think writing stuff down before you go, and even have like a little notebook of stuff, I think that's a good idea, because I think once the meeting gets going, you might forget a lot of things that you are going to talk about. So write them down. Contact a special education teacher and request a copy of the proposed IEP documents, including Parents' Bill of Rights and procedural safeguards. Every meeting you go to, the process coordinator or the district rep should be giving you procedural safeguards, and those are just your basic rights as a parent. Because your child has an IEP, they should be offered to you at every meeting. I'm sure some people have a whole stack of them at home. They've been to so many meetings. And talk with your child about school and their vision of future to help formulate the goals for success. Okay, I'm gonna move on. During the meeting, what to expect. The team to examine the goals and if there has been progress or if the goals need to be modified or changed. From one year to the next, it might be that the goal you had that I wrote last May is still appropriate for the kid because they haven't met the goal, but everyone agrees that the goal is still good. And maybe we keep the goal, but we change the percentage from 50% of the time now to 80% of the time. It's perfectly okay to keep the same goal as long as everybody is in agreement. And as long as there is documentation showing that progress is being made towards a goal. Sometimes a goal you come up with for a student you think is good, and after you've worked on it for a while, you realize maybe that's not the best goal for them, but you know, that happens. Determine if new services need to be added to your child's plan. Again, that would be going back to like you were talking about, you might need more. If you think your last IEP, they didn't need occupational therapy. Now the last year, for some reason, people are starting to talk again. Maybe there are some sensory things going on that we had not noticed before. At the meeting, you can request for them to get tested, get retested for occupational therapy again. You have that right to do that. Yes?
Do you then have like another meeting if they do qualify?
Yes. Yeah, you'll have to have another meeting. She asked, do you have to have another meeting to, if they get qualified? Yes, you do, because then you would have to add that to your services page on the IEP. The service page is just a page that shows the number of minutes your child is receiving in special ed and how they are spread out during the day, you know, like 60 minutes of OT, 500 minutes of social skills, et cetera. And that. So if that service would be added, yeah, you'd have to go back and redo the IEP to change that, the service page. The IEP is not considered complete till all members of the team are in agreement to the goals, services, and accommodations and modifications. I had an IEP about 4 years ago that took 4 months to complete, because we could not come to agreements on what this child needed. So the whole IEP took almost 15 hours total time, and back and forth. So if you have a meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and there's an hour given to it, if it's not finished, then you just come back and you do it again till you get it finished. And in my experience, you're not going to have everybody in total agreement on everything, and that's fine. If everybody was in total agreement on everything, then that's a little bit, that's just not normal. I mean, because not everybody has the same view about the kid. The parent's view of the child is probably a little different from the teachers, and it's probably a little different from everybody else. As long as you're in agreement on the main part of the IEP, then you can go on. What can you do at the IEP? Share with the team any changes in medical status or medications and concerns. That's very important, medical status and medications and concerns. I ask all the time because all my students are on some type of medication. We need to know if there was a change in medicine. We need to know if something happened. I had a student a couple years ago that we got diagnosed with diabetes. That's important for everybody to know, to be on the same page. You have a diabetic in your room, you have to know that so you can be prepared for when there are issues with diabetes. Those are all important things for everyone to be aware of. Medications is key. When they go to the doctor and say the medicine got changed from 20 milligrams of Adderall to 30, well, that'd be good to know when that happens so you could start seeing if you see any differences in behavior, negative or positive. The second bullet point, if there are behavioral concerns, don't be afraid to ask for a behavior intervention plan to be created. A behavior intervention plan is simply a plan that targets one goal, targets one area. So you'll pick out the most pressing area on a student, say it's focusing. You write a behavior intervention plan on focusing and how you're going to attempt to change that behavior. If it's aggression, say you have major concerns with a student's very aggressive and you want a behavior intervention plan, then the teacher comes up with a behavior intervention plan targeting reducing aggression. Districts have different forms for the behavior intervention plans. So they vary a little bit, but the basic idea is the same from one district to another. My experience is most kids that have an IEP have a behavior intervention plan. It's rare that I have a kid that doesn't have a behavior intervention plan. And there's a website down there you can check out. Again, speak up if you don't feel comfortable and express your concerns. There's a website if you want to know more about classroom accommodations and modifications. And what we do at Great Circle, when the meeting is over, we will give if the parent wants to keep a draft of the IEP, they are more than welcome to, but invariably we make changes during while we were having the meeting, because we have to add parent concerns, and we change it a little bit, and then we make sure the parents get that within 10 days. And then you just talk and you say, would you like us to mail that to you? Would you like me to give it to Johnny to put in his book bag? Do you want to come up and pick it up? You do what's most convenient for everyone. Any questions about that? Behavior intervention plans? Okay. The IEP process can be stressful and emotional at times. As I talked about earlier, most people that are in special ed that become teachers are in it because they're in it for a good reason, because they want to help kids. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't hold teachers accountable for what's going on with the kid. Again, don't be afraid to ask. I like it when parents ask me questions. It shows that they're involved, and it's beneficial. Remain calm. Don't let your emotions get in the way of having a productive dialogue about your child. Respectful and cooperative. Everyone on the team is there with the goal of advocating and supporting your child. Be positive. Take breaks if you need to. Ask for things to be repeated or clarified if needed. Share your feelings about child's progress or lack thereof academically, socially, behaviorally, and functionally. Provide examples, strategies that work at home, ideas on the plans you think would work for your child, and the need for a transition plan regarding college, vocational school, and career choice. I shared in the IEP I'm going to go over in a minute, I had a parent tell me during the IEP that she was concerned about her child because he couldn't be around anybody in the neighborhood, and everybody was terrified of him because he was so aggressive and so just out there. Nobody would be around. People were afraid to be alone with him. And I shared with her, I said, well, this boy at school gets hugs from all the staff there, all the kids like him, he's outgoing and everybody likes him. And Mom started crying and said, I didn't think that it would ever come to that day it would be like that. But that was me, his experience at school was totally different from the perception that Mom had of her son. And it could go the other way too. What the parents' perception they give of the son, how they are, our daughter at home, is different from school a lot of times. So it's important to be open and share, how that student is. Yes?
So your thing, it says everyone on the team there is with the goal of advocating and supporting your child.
Yes.
Do you get the sense that they're not? And basically in the April-May time, March time, that they're like, so you're going to go to another school, and kind of pushing you off and not. Like, what if you feel like, hey, I don't believe that you're advocating for him. I think you're done with everything that's going on. What do you do as a parent?
So you're asking so you think that they're not being supportive. How do you go about if you think that someone is not being a productive team member? I would tell them that. Say it. Say that at this point it's March and April and your concerns are this. I get the sense that you are saying that it's one way and what you have been talking about and the progress or whatever it is you want to say shows something else. Just tell them that.
So what if they agree?
Well, if they agree, then that's a happy thing, right? If they agree to that, if they
agree that they're not being supportive, like, yeah, I'm done.
Have you actually had someone be like that?
Close to that. Basically said, here's your next placement, and even 5 days before school started or ended, said, are you doing summer school? And I said no, and they're like, well, I was going to have him change on Monday before 4 days. So I had gotten the sense back in March that they were done, but I guess maybe even if I'd asked her and he lied, or wasn't all that true, how do you, as a parent, what do you do then? If you feel like your team isn't productively working on your child's behalf, where do you go with that information?
That's
that concern.
Is it like a destiny situation?
Well, that's where if you can get an educational advocate, they can help you with that. I wish I had more information on how to get an educational advocate. I'm sorry, I don't. They could.
Is your child on the spectrum?
No.
No.
I do have now I have an educational advocate. You can get one through the foster and adoptive care.
Okay.
Good.
That's one option, but I don't know if you're not in that system. But now I feel better. But last year, I really got the sense that they were done and they were just buying their time.
That you thought that really more work needed to be done. They were just pushing on. Yeah.
And I offered help. Offered outside help. I offered. So I wish I'd have known what to do in March.
I think that if you could go back to ask them, well, where is your documentation to show that your daughter or son is ready to move on? Have they met all their goals? Has the placement done everything it can to help meet the needs due to the disability? Ask them for why they're doing it. Ask for documentation. Show us through documentation that your daughter or son is ready to move on because they've met all their goals, because they've done this, blah, etc. And if they can show you that, then that might be one thing. And my odds are they probably can't if you
Okay.
Put it back on them.
Okay.
Yes.
If that happens and you do kind of challenge them So response, what is the parent's chain of command? Where do they go to next? Like, after they leave that meeting, can they take their concerns to a principal? Can they take it to the superintendent? Do they take it back to the IEP process person? Who would be their next chain of command?
Depending on the district and the situation. Say, I'm just going back to what I know. Like where I work, we're a purchase of service place. So I'll use Fort Zumwalt again. I have a kid from Fort Zumwalt. Say the parent is not happy with what we've done with their child and we're saying they need to move on, then you would go to the Fort Zumwalt representative of special ed and say, look, Great Circle is saying that Johnny is ready to move on, yet I have all these reports stating otherwise, and I just get the sense that they just want to push him out. You can have another IEP meeting. Ask for proof. Or not necessarily proof, but documentation showing that you have done everything you can for that child and that they're meeting their goals. So in that case, you would get Fort Zumwalt the special ed coordinator involved.
And if that person doesn't support you, where do you go after that?
You could, I guess your next step would be superintendent. Yes?
Is it a consideration to seek legal counsel and have the legal counsel attend it?
You can do that. You certainly can bring legal counsel to your IEP. I've been involved with several of those, not necessarily because the people weren't happy with what I was doing. That's just the way they went about doing their IEPs. They always had a lawyer with them, that's fine. I mean, that's fine. My experience with some lawyers, though, is a lot of times they don't know a whole lot about the education process. They're just kind of there as, I got a lawyer, that's fine. I mean, as long as the district and people are doing everything right, but yeah, you can have legal counsel. The IEP is a legal document. And once it's written, you are bound by that and you're obligated to do what was written in the IEP. If I wrote, we have documentation showing a certain present level and I have goals written for that, I should be working on those goals. I should be able to show data that he's making progress or not making progress. I should be able to show that we've used every avenue possible to help this student. Yes?
So can parents just drop in and just say, hey, can you show me the data where my kid's at? Or is it something you have to...
You'd get a better response from a teacher if you called them in advance. Yeah.
If you're not feeling like that person is necessarily meeting your kid's goals, can you just drop in and say, hey, let's talk? Is that...
Absolutely. Absolutely. My parents, I all have access to email and text, and I have an open line with them, and they are more than welcome to come up and see the work their students doing, anything they want. Yeah, as a parent, that's your right. The teachers, your child's part of their future is in that person's hand. Yes, ma'am.
I was also going to ask, when the goals are not met and not much progress is made, is it usually because of the teacher or the student himself or parents, or is it the combination?
Combination.
Yeah.
Typically combination.
The reason I ask is that I teach at university in Tokyo, Japan, and usually the parents sign the students up with the student support center, and we're notified. But sometimes parents don't admit to the fact, and the students are obviously weird in class. But, we can report to the support center how the student is behaving, but they can't connect with the parents. And that's really frustrating.
That is very frustrating. The lack of parent support, and from my angle, that's frustrating. Because the parents are a vital part to a kid's success. Just a parent coming up to school once in a while, where a student can see that, you know, we're taught in school all the time, and that kids are concrete learners and visual learners. What can be a better visual learner than a parent coming to school and the child seeing the parent there with a teacher? Is that not a visual? That's, oh, my mom or dad cares enough to come up here. So when that happens, when kids see that parents are concerned, their progress is much better, much better. Sometimes the goals that you came up with at the IEP, I mentioned that earlier, that sounded real good while you're writing the IEP, after you work on for a while, it's kind of like, maybe we should have done something different. But that's an honest thing that happened. And you can kind of tweak those as you go. You can't change the goal, obviously, without having another IEP, but you report back to the parent and you can tell them, that goal we wrote, it's not really the most appropriate thing. At this point, I'm going to try and do this angle with it. Next IEP, we'll redo it. And most parents, if they're receptive to it and they listen to you, most parents are fine with it. But it is a combination when the goals aren't being met. It's usually just not one thing. It's never the teacher's fault. You know that, right? Yeah. Yes.
How often do you report back to your parents on progress? I know you have your progress reports or your student-teacher conferences. We have recently made a request to at least have some notification monthly, just to kind of see what's going on. Is that typical for you? Do you notify parents automatically, or does parents come and they have to request it from you?
I send a note home every day with my students.
That's too much for my.
That's all right.
Ours.
We have.
In agreement with weekly, so monthly with.
Yeah, we have a point sheet, and my kids are on a point system, so they're on a point sheet, and I write little comments. So my parents, I'm in contact with every day. It's not a full write-up on every goal every day. You're not going to do that, but it tells you so and so. I'll write in there what we did in math, what we did in whatever. So I do it daily. We send out official progress notes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year, where we go through the goals and we give, we collect the data, give percentages, and send them out to the district and the person. We have 2 teacher conferences a year and an IEP. So,
So
how often?
Too much then, for at least monthly.
You want? Yeah. Yeah. Well, once I think staying in contact every day, especially if a kid has been placed as far as where they are, like where we are, I think that's important. And because then the notes that get signed in return, which not everyone does that, then they can send me little notes back saying, yeah, Pete said we did this in math, and oh, by the way, I'm picking them up at 1. It's just a good way of keeping communication. Okay, let me move on here. And after the meeting is over, review the IEP and look for concerns, goals, and make sure the accommodations and related service minutes are correct. File your copy of the IEP in one place. Review your IEP throughout the year. Any questions about that? Yes?
How often do you suggest reviewing it?
It depends on what kind of problems the kid is having. If it's, say the goal is written on like severe aggression, I would think you should review it quite often. If it's something like they have a learning disability in reading or math, you look at it and everything, but that's going to take a while to fix that problem. You assume that people are working on it, but like the aggression, you want to know right away, is it getting better or not? So I think it depends on what the behavior is you're talking about. If, as I said, you can request an IEP at any time that you want. It just does not have to be an annual IEP. If I have a parent who's not happy with what's going on, they go to the district and say, I want a new IEP to review what's going on, then the IEP's set up. You have that right.
So then the IEP is good from that, say you did it again and you a new IEP in like the middle of the school year?
It-
And then is that good until?
It depends.
School year?
It depends.
Okay.
If you want to, if you, say you have an annual IEP and you have another IEP, say 3 months into that IEP, does that change the date of the IEP? And I said it depends. Sometimes you can have an IEP meeting where nothing gets changed in the IEP. It's just the team getting together talking about this is getting better, this is getting worse, what can we do to change that? So then you just might keep the same date then. If you go in and change a bunch of stuff, change goals, then yeah, you might change that annual date.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. I mean, again, things to do, it depends on what, it depends on your child. I mean, explain to your child any changes made, reasons for those changes. Again, depending on your child's disability, that may or may not be appropriate. But you certainly talk to your kids about, hey, I met with Mr. John today and he said all these good things about you. And he also said, here are some things that we still need to work on and what do you think about that? And keep the child, let your child know that you are involved and that you do talk with the teacher. Continue a child's therapy goals at home for good continuation of skills and goals. Focus on abilities and progress, not grades. Find activities that emphasize child's strengths to help with building confidence. I had a kid long time ago, 18, 19 years ago, and I was telling Emily this story earlier, he was only interested in paper. So any reward system that we had for him, we have a store where I work where the kids can earn tokens and go and buy candy and toys and this kind of stuff once a week at the end of the week. And back then on the afternoons on Fridays, if kids were good, we'd show a little movie. He didn't want any of that. What he wanted was paper and things to make stuff with. And so that's what I changed his plan for. That's what he worked for. So we had actual IEPs that the IEP was written. That was part of his behavior intervention plan. Long story short, this kid, I had him for 3 years. He was with me because his behavior is so outrageous. And he worked for that, and back then his diagnosis was Asperger's. They don't call it that anymore. But, and he wanted to be by himself all the time, making his stuff. So I said, well, he can make his stuff, but eventually I made him go outside at recess with his stuff and make it outside because I knew that would force him to have to explain to people what he's doing because this kid I could see he had a big talent in that area. He could make stuff like tanks and World War II airplanes, actual models that were, oh, Mr. John, this was the old blah, 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 and I don't even know what he's talking about. But you look at it, you say, that's a plane. That's a T-Rex that this kid made. And so then, because everybody would be outside at recess and they'd looking at this stuff, you would see an actual dinosaur made out of paper and paper clips and old, what do you use for wheels? Oh, the tape came on those plastic rolls, you know, when that would run out, he used those for wheels on a tank, and these kids were just all fascinated, so this kid had to interact. And eventually he got better and better. Long story short, he's an aerospace engineer now. So that was the team getting together and working out that his strength was making things, and his strength was, that's called a real individualized education plan, you know, and I guess that's what I'm trying to stress really with the IEP. It should be individualized towards that person. And that was an extreme case, I know that, but I always like to use that example because it shows the how you have to adapt and really use strengths, and that's where parents really can help out the teacher saying, yeah, this kid is really good at this, and then that gives a teacher more ways of connecting with that kid and working on their strengths. All right, let me move on here. Okay, if you look in your packet, there's an actual IEP, and I'm just going to show you a couple of things. on this IEP. This is a St. Louis City IEP, and I wrote this back in May. And all IEPs have a cover page, so every district will have a cover page on it. And on the bottom is the important part where people sign, and it lets you know who is at the IEP. If you turn to the second page, see at the top where it says present level of academic achievement? That's what I was talking about earlier. Everything that's in this present level that was discussed in that IEP, there should be a goal written for that. So if your area of concern is task avoidance, there has to be a goal on that. If your area of concern is aggression, there has to be a goal on that. This is where I give my report. This boy does not receive OT or speech, so there was no OT or speech, but there was a therapist report in there, and there is a part down there, I'm sorry, don't hit. Down here it says concerns of the parent for enhancing child's education. That's an important part too. That's where parents let everyone know their concerns, and when I talk about the strengths, I always ask the parent, what are your strengths? What are the student's strengths? And then if you turn, I'm not going through every page with you. I'm going to show you the important parts that are. Page 6, you go to page 6, here are one of the goals that are written. And the goal is based on information obtained in the present level. And let me go back and see if there's a behavior plan for this boy. If you turn to page 18, there's a part in there, remember I was talking about earlier, accommodations. We have a whole list of things here, and I have checked off anything on there that I am using with this student in the classroom, besides the typical things that we use in the setting every day. I've checked off every specific thing that I'm using with this student. Now let me see if there's a plan. So like I said, this one does not have a plan with it. Oh, because this student was only 5 years old, so he was too young for us to write a plan for him yet. So this is what a city IEP looks like. Special school district IEP has a cover page, but everything else looks different than this. Fort Zumwalt is different. So you run into some problems sometimes when kids change district to districts, translating that stuff over onto a new IEP. Does anybody have any questions about this IEP? Okay, the last section then of the presentation about getting organized. Create a records binder or notebook. I do this at school. We have it says IEP binder. We have a data binder. I have one for each one of my kids, and it has, their IEP, their planned work samples, data, STAR assessment tests. It has all that stuff in it. And I recommend you doing this as well. Keep an IEP binder. Keep all the IEPs you've had for your child. Progress reports, report cards, work samples, performance scores. Keep all that stuff together, because if not, that stuff tends to get lost. And it's a nice way of looking back so you can see progress. You can see where the student was and where they currently are. And Emily listed some other resources for you. There's so much stuff to pick from. Sometimes it's overwhelming, there's too much stuff. But these are all good sites for you to look at about IEPs. Okay, does anybody have questions? Anything else? I hope I helped you out a little bit. Does everybody understand? You guys are all ready to write IEPs now, right? Okay. Like I said, well, thank you all for coming. And say if you have any questions, the resources we had that might help you out, or call Emily and I can talk to you. All right. Thank you.